Boy, I feel like I'm being interrogated, you know? I did it. Greetings to all of you and those of you who are on the webcast, and if the NSA is listening, welcome to you too. I bring you greetings from the Show Me state of Missouri. As you know, I'm from Independence, Missouri, suburban Kansas City. You probably didn't realize, but the Apostle Thomas was from the Show Me state of Missouri. You don't know? You reading the book of John? When he was asked about whether or not he thought Christ was raised from the dead, he said, "Show me." God, you guys are rough. Rough crowd. Actually, that was my mother playing the piano, so I like being down here. I appreciate the opportunity to speak and to see many of you again. Like I say, living in Independence is kind of a unique place because I got a lot of childhood memories. I think one of the things I wanted to say was like when I was in junior high, they used to let us out sometimes when I was in 7th and 8th grade because President Johnson would drive by our school to see President Truman who lived up the street. So that was a big thrill to be 13, 14 years old and watching LBJ stick his head out the window, and big Texas hat, and he had a big nose too, but that was always fun. You know what I want to talk about today, and I probably want to talk about, and I think kind of reinforce what some of the other speakers have talked about, is the fact that it's a privilege for us to be here. You know, we don't realize what an opportunity that we have. We don't realize, it's hard to believe what we have, that we have been personally selected by Christ to be here. And I think Wayne mentioned some of that yesterday, but I want to talk a little bit more about what it means to be part of the chosen. You were chosen to be here. You were chosen because God wanted you to be here. And I think that sometimes in our everyday lives and our everyday trials, we just lose sight of the fact that it's a privilege, and how much of a privilege it is to be here, to have our minds open to the truth, and that we have an opportunity to understand things that a lot of learned men throughout the ages have wanted to know but cannot understand. You know, let's go, and sometimes I guess we also ask the question, why did God do it to me and not to somebody else? I want to go back to start with. If you want to have a summary of what I want to talk about today, let's go to 1 Peter 2:9. And Peter wrote this. He said, "For you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of Him who has called you out of darkness into His marvelous light." The words I want to emphasize here are chosen and called, because you're called to be here. You're here because God called you. Out of all the billions on this earth, He called you. He called me. And it is, again, a very tremendous opportunity which we have. And we ask ourselves the question, well, why? I have to go back to a scripture. I've got a few scriptures that are kind of key in my mind. But this one in Exodus 3:14 stands out to me. And because it really, to me, describes what Christ does and why He does things. In Exodus 3:14, Christ said to Moses, Moses said, "Well, what's your name?" "My name's Moses, but who are you?" And he said, "I am who I am." And he said, "You shall say to the sons of Israel, I am who has sent you." Now, this word is sort of a derivation of the Hebrew word to be. So in other words, what Christ is telling Moses is, I can do whatever I want to do. I can be whatever I want to be. And I think what it denotes the fact that Christ has unlimited power, unlimited ability, and he can basically do what he wants, when he wants, how he wants, and where he wants. And I think the world, the universe to me is full of examples like that. For instance, I like history, I like astronomy, and my favorite example is the fact of the pink planet. Now, you think God likes pink. Well, there is a pink planet out there. It is twice the size of Jupiter, and it's pink. Go online and look at it. It's funny. It's funny to look at it. There's another planet that's made out of a diamond, pure diamond. And it circles, I think, a double star, but it's a pure diamond. They exist because Christ wills it to be. You are called because he willed it, and because he wanted you, and he wanted you now. And he called you. He chose you. He has a purpose for you. Every one of us in this room, and everybody listening to this webcast, and people at feast sites all over the earth, we're here because there's a purpose involved. And Christ has chosen us for that. I'm still trying to figure out what my purpose is, but I guess one of these days I'll figure it out. Again, we're chosen. John 15, verse 16 and 19. We did not choose Christ. He chose us. John 15, verse 16. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you. Again, the words, I chose you. I appointed you. I elected you. That you would go and bear fruit, and your fruit would remain, so that whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he may give it to you. Verse 19, you were of the world, and the world loves its own. I've been in church since I've been a little kid, okay? 11 years old. A lot of my friends have dropped out. And even my sister. And maybe God didn't choose them. I don't know. I hope so. I hope they come to their senses someday and they come back. We're still very close. But Christ chose you. You were not of the world, but I chose you out of the world. Because of this, the world hates you. We're different. We think differently than other people. We think differently than our friends. Probably guys that I hang out with are my softball team. I've played with a lot of these guys, a couple of them for 30 years, some of them for 20, and some for less than about 3. But I think differently than they do. I really do. I listen to them, and there are some things we can kind of talk about, but there are things that we cannot talk about. And they know I'm different. One of the things that they know is they say, well, Miller doesn't eat pork. We think that's funny, but we like to tailgate after some of our games, and they always give me the beef hot dogs. Especially, I think last time they had Hebrew Nation hot dogs, and I think one of the players made a comment, well, Miller, we got your Hebrew dogs here for you. But that's okay, I kind of take it in good jest, because I can kind of dish it out with them too. But I'm different, and that's okay. Because someday their minds are going to be open to the truth, and they're going to probably come to me with their Bibles open, and after I get over the initial shock of it, then we'll sit down and have a Bible study, and I'll explain to them what it's about. But again, Christ has chosen us at this time for his reasons. John 6:44. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him. He draws you. It's like a magnet, he draws you. The comparison I can sort of make, an analogy, is sort of like the National Football League draft. where players are picked according to skills and how they fit in with the team's needs. That's sort of what it's like in a loose sort of way. That's what an analogy of a Christian is. We're sort of drafted, and we're drafted on the Christ team because he needs us. And he needs us because there's a purpose involved. So what is that purpose? Well, there are several purposes here. Let's go to James 1:18. I think sometimes it's hard to imagine the special privilege and what really lies ahead of us and what we really have. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine. In James 1:18, it says, James wrote, that in the exercise of his will, notice, his will, he brought us forth by the word of truth. He brought us. We didn't bring him, he brought us. So that we would be a kind of first fruits among his creatures. What's it like to be? You're called to be a first fruit. You're called to be a firstborn. The Feast of First Fruits, go back to the Old Testament, and it's sort of analogous of the firstborn. And if you look and read about the privileges of the firstborn in the Old Testament, they had a double inheritance. They became the patriarch of the family. They exercised, they had a lot of privileges. I'm a firstborn child. There's me and there's myself and there's my sister. And the only privilege I get as a firstborn is to be told on my birthday by my sister is that you'll always be older than me. Okay, I got a rough sister, okay? No, I got a wonderful sister. But I'm saying is a firstborn, which you are, which we all are, we have special privileges and a special nobility that's going to last us through eternity. We will be able to probably, what's a firstborn? Firstborns will be identified throughout eternity. People will say, wow, there goes a firstborn. It's something really, really special that we have. John 14, we read this at the Passover. Christ called us to do a job. He said, don't let your hearts be troubled. Believe in me. Believe in God. For in my house, Father's house, are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you, for I go to prepare a place for you. We read that. The temple, he's speaking of a job. The temple was an office complex. It had a sacrificial facility, but that's where the priests had their offices. It's sort of like the state capitol. I go to the state capitol in Missouri, it's like an art gallery. Really, there's a lot of great art in the state capitol. But there's a lot of offices too. There's the offices of all the state legislators. That's where the governor has his office, the lieutenant governor, the secretary of state, the attorney general, the state treasurer. That's where their offices are. Jesus is preparing a job for us. He's coming back to save this earth. And his job is to convert every living human being who has ever had the breath of life into a son or daughter of God. And that's his job. And our job is to help him do it. It may be ruling a city. I don't know what your job is. I don't know what mine is. But there is a purpose and a reason, and he's training us right now. That's why it's really important that we get to know this book, that we get to know the basics of this book, because someday all of you are going to be standing in my spot teaching other people about it. I'm just a teacher training other teachers. But that's your job, and Christ called you now in order to prepare for the job that's ahead. And it's going to be a job that suits your talents, and it's going to be a job that suits your abilities and your passion, and a job that's going to serve this world, because this world mourns and it cries for the return of Christ, because he's the only hope that we have on this planet. In 1 Corinthians 2:9, Paul wrote this. He said, "Eye has not seen and ear has not heard the things that God has prepared for us. Our minds cannot comprehend what Christ has waiting for us." It is mind-boggling. You know, what's it like to live forever? I don't know. I have no idea what it's like. I have no idea what it's like to learn to fly without the benefit of an airplane. I don't know. I don't know what it's like. And Paul said it's so wonderful, and that's part of being chosen. You know, that's what you have right now. And that's why Christ says in Revelation 3, he says, don't let any man take your crown. You got to hold on to it. Because you're special and you're chosen. And our job is part of that job is to help other people be chosen too. Because we read in Matthew 5:13 that we're the salt of the earth. That we're the light of the earth. We live in a very dark world. And you know, the only light in this world is the light of Christ that burns inside of us. And you know, God sees the light. The angels see the light. Satan sees the light too. And we're like little light bulbs that kind of throughout our journeys, when we disperse from this facility and we go back home, we're like little lights. And you have an influence, whether you believe it or not, you have an influence through God's Spirit on other people. You have a hedge about those that you love. You have an influence, a positive or negative influence on people, because sometimes the only contact that people will have with the truth may be you. That's why we have to sometimes be very kind of use some discretion on how we approach people. You know, like I say, we have an influence. We shine as a lantern in a very dark world, and we can have a very strong and a positive influence on people if we will just let Christ live within us. And we do that by growing in grace and knowledge. And remember that all of us are going to be helpers in the joy of the salvation of other people. You know, Christianity has a negative connotation sometimes, but I think we need to make it more positive and be a positive influence on others that we meet in this world. Because again, our job as being chosen is to be the joy helper and the joy of someone else's salvation. What a privilege and what an honor to have that opportunity. It has value. We have, because we're chosen, we have purpose and we have value. 1 Peter 1:18. He said that we were not redeemed with perishable things like silver or gold from your futile way of life inherited from your forefathers, but with the precious blood as of a lamb unblemished and spotless, the blood of Christ. We were purchased and bought with Jesus' blood. We were bought with a whip. When they tied him to that pole stark naked before they crucified him, and they beat him into a piece of hamburger, so much so he couldn't even be recognized. It was interesting. Like I say, I'm a history geek, and I watch the Military Channel a lot because they have a lot of interesting things. But the scholars, they had a piece on there about the crucifixion. And they said, the scholars on that said that they can read about crucifixions, but the only personal account of a crucifixion, of how it actually was inflicted on someone, is through the gospel accounts. And I thought that was interesting. When we read the gospel accounts about how Jesus was scourged and mocked and all the beating that he took, That is the only written account in recorded history of how a crucifixion was personally inflicted on someone. I mean, they said, and they kind of did the little demonstrations, but Jesus was in a rhythmic shock by the time that they finished beating him. He was almost dead. And that is what your life means to him. That is how valuable you are to him. With every lash of the whip and the blood that he spilled, and when they drove those nails through his wrist, and the soldier stuck the spear in his side, and he stood there, and he hung in agony for 6 hours. Yeah, you have value. That's what it means. His blood. And because of that, he says in Philippians 1:6 that once he starts the process, he will not quit us. Christ did not call you, and he did not call me to fail. He called us to win. No matter what obstacles we face in our lives, no matter what trials, he called us to win. Philippians 1:6, for I am confident of this very thing, that he who began a good work in you will perfect it until the day of Christ Jesus. You are called to win. You're called to overcome. That's what you're called to do. You're called so he can hand you that crown at his return. In Hebrews 13:5, he promises that he will never forsake us. Yeah, it may think, the road that we travel sometimes, and I'll tell you in my own personal life, I felt like I'm all alone on that road. And, sometimes the road that we travel isn't fun. But Christ is always there, and sometimes he has to pick us up and he has to carry us for a while. But he's promised never, ever to leave us. We're called, we're chosen, but guess what? The decision is ours. God gave us free moral agency, and he gave us freedom. The parable of the talents in Matthew 13, the sower in Matthew 13, verses 16 through 22, shows that some seed fell on good ground, some seed fell on thorny ground, some seed fell on mediocre ground. And the cares of the world took away the seed that did not fall on fertile ground, because people chose not to follow the calling. Back in here again, Matthew 13. It's your choice. You have a choice. I have a choice. Jesus can call us. He can pick us. But we have a choice in that calling. He said in verse 13 or 16 of Matthew, because your ears, blessed are you, because your eyes, because they see, and because they hear. Do you want to know how much we really know, how much we really have as a privilege? Follow down on this verse. For I say to you that many prophets and righteous men desired to see what you see and did not see it, and to hear what you hear and did not hear it. We understand things and have knowledge that Daniel didn't even have. And Daniel was a righteous man, one of the great prophets. That's how much of a privilege we have. 1 Thessalonians 5:19 tells us not to quench the Holy Spirit. Again, it's a choice that we make. We're special to God. It is a privilege. It is something that is the most wonderful opportunity in the history of mankind to be here, to have our minds open to the truth, to listen to the webcast, to attend a feast site, to meet on the Sabbath. We're special. We're called. We're chosen. We're not better than other people. We're really not. But what we are, we're chosen. And we're called to be a positive influence. And we're called to be a first fruit and a firstborn. And Christ has a place for us. He wants you here. So remember, you're special to God. And you're here because He wants you here. And He wants you to overcome. And He wants to hand you that crown of life that exists, that has your name on it. Remember, you're special, you're chosen, and never let go of what we have.